Tonight's tale is for every soul who has been chained by circumstances they did not choose, who has bowed their head while the powerful feasted on their suffering, who whispered in the darkness, "One day, they will answer for this." Let me tell you what the scholars of the Wolflands refuse to write in their chronicles. King Fenris the Scarred lost his eye and right arm in the Battle of Crimson Valley. His own generals declared him unfit to rule, dividing his territories among themselves. But that one-eyed, one-armed wolf spent 2 winters watching from the shadows, memorizing every betrayal. When the hunter's moon rose, he executed 17 traitors in a single night and ruled for 40 more years. Queen Lyanna Bloodmoon was poisoned at her own coronation feast. For 3 years, she let them believe the poison had destroyed her mind, drooling at state dinners, speaking nonsense at court. All while she documented which nobles smiled as they watched her deterioration. The night she revealed her deception, the castle stones ran red with traitors' blood. Alpha Thorn Ironwood took 7 silver bullets during a peace negotiation. His own beta declared him paralyzed, assumed control of the pack. For 5 years, Thorn sat silent in his wheelchair, watching his beta sell pack secrets to their enemies. The night he finally stood, he didn't just reclaim his throne. He rewrote the very laws of succession. These wolves understood what pampered nobles in their warm halls never could. A wolf who cannot run learns to watch. And watching teaches you exactly where to bite. Tonight's story is about a king who mastered that lesson better than any alpha before him. Caleb Silvercrest, 32 years old. Once the most feared alpha in the northern Wolflands. The wolf who could shift mid-leap, whose howl could freeze blood in your veins, whose name alone kept 3 enemy kingdoms at bay. Then came the night of the peace summit. Silver-poisoned arrows, 7 of them, piercing his spine while his own beta stood mysteriously absent from his guard post. They said the silver had burned through his wolf's essence. Said his legs would never carry him again. Said his mind had shattered along with his spine. They called him the Crippled King. His beta, Theron Greystone, assumed regency temporarily. The noble houses carved up his territories like wolves over a fresh kill. They spoke to him slowly, as if his ears had failed along with his legs. Patted his shoulder like he was a pup who'd lost his way. They had no idea he was documenting every whispered conspiracy, every midnight meeting, every piece of gold that changed hands. Writing it all in a black leather journal that would become their death warrant. But he needed one final piece. A bride, not for love, not for an heir, but for the last move in a 3-year game of revenge. And fate delivered Mary Thorn, 19 years old, Omega daughter of a disgraced noble house. A girl who'd watched her sister Lily dragged away by creditors to serve in a southern pleasure house because her father couldn't stop gambling. A girl who'd worked as a seamstress until her fingers bled, as a healer's assistant until she collapsed from exhaustion, as a tavern maid enduring the groping hands of drunken patrons, all to gather coins her father would steal and gamble away before she could buy her sister's freedom. She walked down that cathedral aisle expecting to serve a broken wolf, expecting nothing but duty and degradation from a marriage that was just another form of slavery. And on their wedding night, when the great oak doors of the bedchamber closed and she steeled herself for whatever humiliation awaited, Caleb Silvercrest rose from his wheelchair, crossed the room on legs that had supposedly been dead for 3 years, fixed her with eyes that burned alpha gold in the candlelight, and spoke 7 words that would bring an empire of traitors to its knees. The performance is over. Now we hunt. Before we continue, I've noticed that many of you enjoy watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please help support and grow this channel by liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing if you enjoy the stories. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. Chapter 1. The Last Betrayal. The cottage sat at the edge of Thornfield, where the cobblestones gave way to mud and the street lamps no longer bothered to burn. A place where the walls wept with damp and the floorboards groaned threats of collapse. Mary Thorne pushed through the warped door, her hands still raw from 12 hours of scrubbing bloodstains from the healer's floors. Before that, 6 hours spent over torn garments at the seamstress shop. Before that, 4 hours serving ale to men whose hands wandered as freely as their coins. Her body was a map of exhaustion, every muscle screaming, every joint swollen. She no longer remembered what it felt like to wake without pain. But when she saw her father sitting at their rotted table, a bottle of cheap spirits in his hand and that smile, the one she'd learned meant he'd done something unforgivable, she knew tonight's suffering had only begun. Marcus Thorne lifted his graying head, his eyes bright with the fever of a gambler who'd finally found a way out. He gestured for her to sit, slurring that he had news, wonderful news, that would change everything. Mary didn't sit. She stood with her back against the door, arms wrapped around herself, and asked what he'd lost this time. Marcus laughed, the sound like breaking glass, said he hadn't lost anything. He'd won their freedom from Lord Blackwood's debts, won a future she couldn't have imagined. The cottage grew cold despite the summer heat outside. Mary's wolf, weak as Omega blood made her, stirred with primitive warning. "What did you do?" Her voice came out steady, though her hands shook. Marcus Thorne set down his bottle, looked at his daughter with eyes that held no father's love, only a coward's relief, and said, "The crippled king needs a bride. Lord Blackwood will forgive our debts when you marry him tomorrow night." The words landed like silver in her veins. Caleb Silvercrest, the broken alpha, the mad king in his wheeled throne. Mary heard her own heartbeat thundering, heard the wind rattling the loose window panes, heard a wolf howling somewhere in the distance, long and mournful, like a funeral song. But she couldn't hear the one thing that mattered anymore: hope. Because in the northern wolflands, everyone knew what happened to the wives of mad kings. They disappeared. The throne room of Silvercrest Castle stretched before Mary like a maw lined with fangs of black marble. "Lady Mary Thorne," the herald announced, his voice carrying across the hall, "betrothed to His Majesty, King Caleb Silvercrest." The whispers began immediately, a susurration of contempt and pity that followed her like smoke. Theron Greystone approached first, all-practiced charm and perfect teeth. The beta's hand was warm as he kissed her knuckles, but his gray eyes held the calculating coldness of a wolf evaluating prey. "Welcome to court, my lady. If you need anything at all, I'm at your service." His smile never wavered, but something in his tone suggested he expected her to need many things very soon. Lady Morgana of House Ironpaw circled next, her crimson gown trailing like spilled blood. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just studied Mary with the frank assessment of someone examining livestock. "So you're the sacrifice," she murmured, loud enough for nearby courtiers to hear. Only Lord Fenris, ancient and bent with age, showed her genuine kindness. His milky eyes still held traces of alpha gold as he patted her hand. "Child," he whispered, leaning close enough that she could smell pipe tobacco and old leather, "things are not always what they seem in this castle." Then they brought her to him. Caleb Silvercrest sat motionless in his wheeled chair at the base of the throne he could no longer climb. His head lolled slightly to one side, dark hair falling across a face that might have been handsome if not for the vacant expression. When Theron loudly announced her presence, the king's blue eyes, once legendary for their piercing intensity, barely flickered in her direction. A string of saliva gathered at the corner of his mouth. A servant stepped forward to wipe it away with practiced efficiency. The silver poisoning destroyed more than his legs. Someone whispered behind Mary. His wolf is dead. His mind barely functions. The ceremony was mercifully brief. Caleb's hand was cold and limp in hers as Theron guided it through the motions. When the priest called for the king to speak his vows, Theron spoke them instead while Caleb stared at nothing. Mary felt the last ember of hope in her chest finally extinguish. She was truly alone. The oak doors of the king's chambers closed with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Mary stood in the center of the room, her white wedding gown pooling around her like spilled milk on dark stone. The space reeked of medicinal herbs and that particular staleness that clings to sick rooms, decay dressed in lavender. Caleb's wheelchair sat before the massive hearth, his silhouette curved and broken against the firelight. Mary approached slowly, her omega instincts screaming submission even as her human heart prepared for whatever degradation awaited. She'd heard the stories. Mad kings did terrible things to their brides, especially kings whose bodies no longer functioned as men's should. "Your Majesty," she began, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The lock clicked behind her. Mary spun to find the door already secured, though no servant had entered. When she turned back, Caleb Silvercrest was standing, not struggling, not grasping furniture for support, standing with the fluid grace of a predator that had been coiled too long in waiting. "Don't scream," he said, and his voice, God, his voice was nothing like the slurred mumbling from the ceremony. It was dark silk over sharpened steel. The walls have ears, and those ears belong to traitors. Mary's back hit the door. Her mind couldn't reconcile the vacant invalid from hours ago with this man whose eyes burned alpha gold in the firelight, whose presence filled the room like smoke before a wildfire. "You're not," she breathed. "Paralyzed?"
No.
"Not anymore." Caleb moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. The silver poisoning was real. 7 arrows, each one dipped in enough poison to kill a normal wolf. But I'm not normal, am I? I'm Silvercrest blood. We're harder to kill than most. He pulled a black leather journal from behind a false panel in the wall, its pages swollen with 3 years of documentation. Theron Greystone, my beta, my brother in all but blood. He orchestrated it. Paid the archers. Ensured the guards were absent. Then played the loyal friend, assuming temporary control while I healed. Mary's legs trembled. "Why tell me this?" "Because I need someone they'll never suspect. Someone they've already dismissed as another victim." His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her wolf bare its throat. "Your sister Lily. She's not in just any pleasure house. She's in Blackwood's personal collection, the one he keeps for special clients. The one where girls don't usually survive their first year." The words landed like claws in her chest. "Help me identify every traitor in this court," Caleb continued, producing a silver blade from his desk. "Be my eyes among the ladies, my ears among the servants. In return, I'll burn Blackwood's entire operation to ash and bring your sister home breathing." Mary looked at the blade, at the journal thick with evidence, at this king who'd fooled an entire kingdom. "And if I refuse? Then you're the Crippled King's pathetic Omega bride until you conveniently disappear." He extended the blade handle first. "But something tells me you're tired of being helpless." She took the blade and drew it across her palm without hesitation. Blood welled, dark as wine. Caleb smiled, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. He cut his own palm and clasped her hand, their blood mingling as he spoke the old words. "Blood to blood, hunt to hunt, until our enemies are nothing but memory and ash." The pact burned through her veins like liquid silver, and Mary realized she'd just become the deadliest secret in the kingdom. Watch Lady Morgana's left hand when she lies, Caleb instructed, guiding Mary to the window overlooking the courtyard where nobles gathered for their morning hunt. See? She touches her ruby ring. Every time. For 2 weeks, he'd been teaching her to read the court's hidden language. How Theron's jaw tightened before he gave false compliments. How Lord Blackwood's eyes drifted right when calculating betrayal. How the servants' whispers carried more truth than any noble's proclamation. Mary proved a quick study. Her years of invisibility, of being furniture in taverns and healing houses, had already taught her to observe. Now Caleb sharpened that skill into a weapon. By day, she played the pitiful Omega bride. She attended Lady Morgana's tea gatherings, where wives discussed which lords visited whose bedchambers. She lingered in the servants' hall, mending torn linens while kitchen maids gossiped about which nobles met in shadows. At formal dinners, she sat silent beside Caleb's wheelchair, memorizing every alliance, every slight, every glance that lingered too long. By night, she reported everything in his chambers, while he documented it all in his growing collection of journals. Theron met with 3 Western lords in the old tower, she said one midnight, pacing before his fire. They spoke of succession rights, of what happens to a kingdom when its king can no longer produce heirs. Caleb's laugh was bitter. He always was impatient. Even as boys, he couldn't wait his turn in training circles. These midnight hours began to shift, evolving from reports into something rawer. Mary found herself staying longer, sitting closer, sharing pieces of herself she'd buried. My father wasn't always worthless, she admitted one night, watching flames dance across Caleb's features. He was a respected lord once. Then mother died birthing Lily and he crumbled. Started drinking. Started gambling. Started selling pieces of us to feed his habits. Betrayal by blood cuts deepest, Caleb replied, his voice hollow. Theron held me while I bled from those arrows. Swore he'd find who did it. All while knowing he'd paid for every shot. Mary saw it then, the profound loneliness beneath his calculated vengeance. 3 years of pretending to be broken while surrounded by enemies. 3 years of swallowing pride, of allowing mockery, of watching his kingdom carved apart by vultures. She reached across the space between them, her fingers barely grazing his hand. He caught her wrist gently, his thumb tracing the healing cut from their blood pact. Then, soft as wolf fur, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Mary, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like absolution. Not wife. Not Omega. Mary. For the first time since Lily was taken, she felt seen. Lady Morgana's chambers reeked of perfume thick enough to mask the scent of secrets. Mary knelt beside the ornate writing desk, supposedly retrieving a dropped earring while the lady dressed for court behind a silk screen. Her fingers found the hidden compartment Caleb had described, there, where the wood grain formed a wolf's eye. The letters inside made her blood freeze. The old fool grows weaker by the day. Theron's handwriting sprawled across expensive parchment. Once the hunter's moonball passes, we'll arrange another accident. Something public. Something that leaves no doubt the crippled king's reign has ended. Then you'll have your northern trade routes, Blackwood, and I'll have my throne. Mary's hands trembled as she memorized each word. Another letter, this one in Blackwood's crude script. Lady Morgana plays her part beautifully. Half the court believes Silvercrest drools on himself. The other half pities him too much to look closer. She slipped the letters back, heart hammering. But as she stood, another document fluttered from between the pages, a payment ledger. The names blurred past until one leaped out like a knife between ribs. Marcus Thorne, 500 gold. For public testimonies regarding the king's deterioration. The room tilted. Mary gripped the desk, her vision swimming. Her father hadn't just sold her. He'd been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. Every drunken rant about Caleb's weakness. Every public humiliation where he'd loudly pitted the broken wolf who could barely remember his own name. All of it paid for with Theron's gold. She didn't remember leaving Lady Morgana's chambers or walking through the castle halls. Didn't remember entering Caleb's rooms until she was there, the evidence falling from her numb fingers as her knees hit stone. Mary? Caleb was beside her instantly, no longer playing the invalid. The words tore from her throat raw and bleeding. My father, they paid him. I know. His voice was soft as moth wings. She looked up, tears cutting tracks down her face. You knew. Since the second year. Caleb's hands framed her face with devastating gentleness. I've known every conspirator, every payment, every betrayal, including your father's. Why didn't you tell me? Because you've been punishing yourself for his sins long enough. His thumb brushed away her tears. Because you came to me already carrying the weight of his failures. I couldn't add more. The sob that escaped her came from somewhere deeper than grief, from the place where little girls still believe their fathers were heroes. Caleb pulled her against his chest, and for the first time in 3 years, the Alpha King of the Northern Wolflands held someone without calculating the advantage. Mary pressed her face into his shoulder, breathing in pine and iron and safety. His arms tightened around her, and she felt the tremor in them. Not from weakness, but from the effort of gentleness after so long playing monster. We'll destroy them all, she whispered against his throat. Every last one, he promised, pressing his lips to her hair. Together. In that moment, the blood pact between them transformed into something deadlier than vengeance. It became love. The Frostwood was a cathedral of pine and silence, the air tasting of oncoming snow. Mary adjusted her grip on the reins, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. For weeks, she'd been Caleb's phantom, moving through the stone corridors of Silvercrest Castle to gather the threads of Theron's betrayal. But today, the hunter's moon was rising, and the atmosphere at the royal hunt had turned jagged. Theron Greystone had watched her all morning with eyes like flint, his smiles never reaching the predatory sharpness of his gaze. She had strayed too far from the main party. The realization hit her just as the birds went silent. A sudden, violent jerk on her horse's bridle sent the world spinning. Mary gasped as her mare reared, spooked by a shadow lunging from the brush. Rough hands seized her cloak, dragging her from the saddle. She hit the frozen earth with a bone-jarring thud, the scent of pine needles and iron filling her senses. The little Omega has been asking too many questions, a voice hissed. It wasn't Theron, but one of his sworn blades, a man with a jagged scar across his throat. 2 others stepped from the shadows, their faces obscured by rough cowls. One of them kicked her in the ribs, a dull, sickening bloom of pain that stole her breath. What does the Crippled King tell you in the dark, girl? Does he weep for his lost legs? Or is he planning a funeral for his beta? Mary spat blood onto the snow, her eyes flashing with a defiance she hadn't known she possessed. He tells me that traitors always choke on their own ambition. The man snarled, silver-studded knuckles connecting with her jaw. The world went gray at the edges. They wanted information, but more than that, they wanted to break the only person Caleb Silvercrest seemed to trust. As they hauled her up by her hair, a low, tectonic rumble vibrated through the ground. It wasn't thunder. It was a growl that felt like a physical weight, pressing the oxygen out of the clearing. Then the shadows exploded. A blur of moonlight and silver fur tore through the underbrush. Mary watched through a haze of pain as a beast, massive, impossible, and wreathed in ancient power, hit the first attacker. There was no scream, only the wet snap of bone as the silver wolf closed its jaws around the man's throat. This was no ordinary shifter. The wolf was the size of a warhorse, its fur shimmering like polished mercury, its eyes two burning embers of pure alpha gold. It moved with a terrifying, predatory grace that mocked the idea of paralysis. The second thug tried to draw a silver blade, but he was dead before the steel cleared the leather, disemboweled by a single sweep of a massive claw. The third man fell to his knees, his mind fracturing at the sight of the legend he thought he had broken. "The king," he whimpered. "You're." The silver wolf didn't let him finish. In a flash of righteous fury, the clearing was silenced. The beast turned toward Mary. For a heartbeat, she saw the monster, the primal force of the northern wolflands. Then, the wolf lowered its head, the golden eyes softening into a gaze she recognized from late-night strategy sessions over candlelight. It was Caleb. He had broken 3 years of agonizing secrecy to save her. He didn't shift back. Instead, he nudged her gently with his snout, urging her to lean against his powerful shoulder. With a strength that felt like the earth itself, he helped her onto his back, her fingers burying deep into his thick, warm fur. As they crested the ridge overlooking the castle, Mary saw Theron standing on the balcony, his face pale as he watched the massive silver form approach. The secret was out. The wolf was no longer watching, he was hunting. Once they reached the safety of the inner courtyard, Caleb's voice, projected through the mental link of the pack bond, echoed in her mind, cold and absolute. "The time for shadows is over. I am sending my elite guard to the Southern Territories tonight. Your sister will be home by dawn. And tomorrow, we take the throne." The ballroom of Silvercrest Castle was a cavern of gold leaf and treachery, illuminated by the harsh, unnatural light of the hunter's moon. Mary stood at Caleb's side, her gown the color of a winter storm, hiding the silver dagger strapped to her thigh. Caleb sat in the mahogany wheelchair, his expression a mask of vacant frailty, though she could feel the heat radiating from him, a coiled spring of lethal intent. Across the floor, Theron Greystone moved with the oily grace of a man who believed he had already won, flanked by the cold, calculating shadow of Lord Silas Blackwood. The music died away, replaced by a suffocating silence as Theron approached, a silver chalice held high. "A toast," Theron proclaimed, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "To our Alpha King, whose body was broken so that his people might find peace. And to his bride, who serves him in his twilight." He stepped forward, offering the cup to Caleb with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mary saw the faint shimmer of the toxin on the rim, a slow-acting venom designed to kill the king and leave her holding the vessel. But Caleb didn't reach for the wine. Instead, he gripped the arms of his chair. The sound of wood splintering cracked through the hall like a gunshot. The nobility gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to pull the oxygen from the room as Caleb Silvercrest stood. He rose slowly, his height towering over Theron, his legs as steady as the mountains. The mask of the invalid fell away, replaced by a face of carved granite and eyes that burned with a terrifying, golden alpha light. "The wine is as sour as your loyalty, Theron," Caleb's voice roared, shaking the crystal chandeliers. "I name you traitor. I name you murderer. And by the laws of the first moon, I challenge you for the right to lead." Theron's face drained of color, then twisted into a mask of feral desperation. He knew there was no retreat. With a guttural howl, Theron shifted, his bones cracking and skin tearing as he transformed into a mangy, charcoal-gray wolf. Caleb didn't hesitate. He exploded into a silver form, a beast of mythic proportions, shimmering like moonlight made flesh. The ballroom became a slaughterhouse of grace and violence. The two wolves collided in a blur of fur and fangs, the sound of their snarls drowning out the screams of the court. In the chaos, Silas Blackwood saw his opportunity. He lunged for Mary, a jagged blade drawn from his cane. "Where is my sister?" Mary demanded, her hand finding the hilt of the silver dagger Caleb had gifted her. Silas sneered, his eyes filled with the arrogance of a man who saw only an omega. "She's where you'll be soon, girl, in a shallow grave." He lunged. Mary didn't shrink. She didn't hide. She pivoted as Caleb had taught her in the dark hours of the night, driving the silver blade upward. It sank deep into Silas's shoulder, the metal burning his corrupt blood. He fell back, howling, as she stood over him, her eyes bright with a newfound, jagged strength. "You will never touch her again." A final, wet crunch echoed through the hall. Caleb had pinned Theron to the marble floor. With a single, decisive snap, he tore the traitor's throat out. The gray wolf went limp, and silence returned to the cathedral-like room, broken only by Caleb's heavy, rhythmic breathing. The heavy doors at the end of the hall swung open. A contingent of loyal guards marched in, and in their center stood a girl with tattered clothes but defiant eyes. "Lily," Mary cried, the dagger falling from her hand as she sprinted across the blood-stained marble. The sisters collided in a sob of relief, years of agony washing away in a flood of tears. But Caleb, still in his massive silver form, padded toward them. The court shrank back, terrified, but he stopped before Mary and lowered his head in a deep, reverent bow. It was the ultimate submission, an alpha acknowledging his true mate and queen before the world. One by one, the lords and ladies of the north fell to their knees. Caleb shifted back, standing tall and nakedly powerful as a cloak was thrown over his shoulders. He took Mary's hand, pulling her to the throne beside him. "This kingdom will no longer be ruled by deception," he declared, his voice a vow. "From this night forward, we lead together as Alpha King and Queen. Let any who doubt us step forward now." Only silence met his challenge. Then, from the ramparts outside, a single howl pierced the night, followed by hundreds more. The pack was answering. Mary looked out over the kneeling court, her hand gripped firmly in Caleb's. She was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was the queen who had earned her crown. If you enjoyed this story, like, comment, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves unexpected endings. Your support truly means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Thank you for being here.